And it is an offer which we are ready to back up. It is an offer you can always count on, now and in the future. Thank you.
I thank the Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs of Germany. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Torgedur Katrin Guðnadóttir, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Iceland.
Madam President, Excellencies, at the heart of the UN Charter lies a simple but powerful principle: the dignity and worth of the human person. It is a reminder that the international cooperation is not about institutions for their own sake, but about people, ordinary people whose lives are freer, safer, and more prosperous when nations choose cooperation over confrontation, dignity over domination, rules over force. This vision, born in San Francisco 80 years ago, must remain our compass. Without it, our world would be less free, less just, and far less secure. For Iceland, a small state whose independence and prosperity depend on the respect for international law, the rules-based order has been nothing short of essential. And sadly, these very foundations are under siege. Fundamental principles of self-determination and equal rights for all nations are increasingly being undermined and even deliberately abandoned. We see paralysis in the Security Councils, contempt for international law, and a disturbing rise in isolationism and big power politics. This, in turn, contributes to a decline in the public's trust in a system that has brought us so much in the past 80 years. This erosion of the rules-based international order is deeply, deeply dangerous. A world not governed by rules will be a world where the strong impose their will and the weaker, they will pay the price. This may appeal to those who possess such power. There are clear indications that it does. But that is a world we cannot and should not accept. Madam President, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine is not only a blatant violation of the UN Charter, it is a direct assault on this organization itself. And the fact that the aggressor sits on the Security Council entrusted with upholding peace is nothing short of obscene. Ukraine is not only bravely fighting for its independence and survival, but also defending the very, very values that the United Nations were founded upon: sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the right of all nations to live in peace and to live in freedom. Unfortunately, despite Ukraine's clear willingness and committed efforts by the United States and Europe, the path to peace has not advanced. As the past few weeks have shown, Russia does not want peace, Instead, the Kremlin accelerates brutal attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure in Ukraine. And meanwhile, Russia's provocations over Estonia, Poland, and Romania should be of concern to all nations. And let us be clear, Russia has no intention of ending this war. It escalates, it terrorizes, it tears children from their homes. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian children have been abducted, a heinous crime, an attack on Ukraine's very, very future. If the dignity and worth of the human person mean anything, it is that these children are returned immediately. To the people of Ukraine, I say, Iceland stands with you, not only out of solidarity, but also because you are on the front lines, defending a rules-based order where law prevails over brute force. You must, dear friends, have a just and lasting peace. Dear colleagues, we must speak with equal clarity about Gaza. We are witnessing now crimes against humanity and war crimes in broad daylight. What appears before us is systematic ethnic cleansing. This needs to end. We need an immediate ceasefire, full humanitarian access, and the unconditional release of all hostages. We need peace for all the innocent people. Iceland unequivocally condemned Hamas's gruesome terrorist attack on Israel October 7th. There is no justification for such brutality, nor the taking of hostages. But nothing, and I mean nothing, can justify the collective punishment of millions of Palestinians. Starvation, bombardment, forced displacement. These acts are cruel, they are inhumane, and they are illegal. There are children dying every day in Palestine. For the past 2 years, at least one child has been killed every hour in Gaza. Every single hour. Iceland recognized Israel in 1948 and Palestine in 2011. Our position remains clear. Both peoples have equal rights to self-determination. Lasting peace depends on it. A two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians live side by side in peace and mutual recognition remains the only viable path to peace, even if many doubts its feasibility today. If we abandon it, we abandon hope itself. Extremists and spoilers on both sides have long stood in the way of peace. Hamas has no place in the future of Palestine. And when Israeli officials call for annexation or the expulsion of Palestinians, they are not defending Israel's security. They are not defending Israel's security. They are calling for violations of international law. And we call it what it is: hateful, illegal, and a direct obstacle to peace. President Russia's aggression in Ukraine, Israel's military operations in Gaza, as well as the horrific war in Sudan, are the starkest demonstrations of deeply troubling global trend. Growing disregard for international law and multilateral commitments. We are seeing this when it comes to international courts. The opinions of the International Court of Justice, ICJ, and the International Criminal Court has been defied and targeted with punitive measures. At a time when more accountability is most needed, the very institutions that were set up to exert that accountability, they are now being actively eroded. And it pains me to see friends partake in this. This is especially alarming for small states like my own, whose very existence depends on functioning system of international law and commitments. When the powerful abandon the rules, all nations are at risk. The same applies to arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, with troubling erosion of long-standing commitments and the weaponization of emerging disruptive technologies. We must also recognize new challenges, global corporations that transcend borders, shaping economies, technology, and also daily life without sufficient accountability. This is a reality without precedent, and one that demands also international responses. I implore all of you, not least those representing major powers, to think about this, to ponder what kind of world we actually want to live in. I, for one, know my mind in this respect. Madam President, human rights are not optional. They are not optional. They are universal, indivisible, and fundamental to peace and prosperity. It is a matter of pride for us that Iceland is seen as a global trailblazer in terms of gender equality. 50 years ago, next month, the women of Iceland set out to strike against the systematic inequality in the so-called women's strike. This set us on a path. But no country is perfect, however, and none has achieved full equality. My government, which is led by 3 women for the first time, is committed to pushing this progress further. And on that topic, Iceland expects nothing less than to see the United Nations finally led by a woman when the next Secretary General takes office. Dear colleagues, I must speak plainly. Those who rely on democracy, human rights and free trade, we are under pressure. Populist movements are gaining ground, and we see how disinformation and conspiracy theories spread online, corroding trust in facts, in institutions, in one another. The result is predictable: rising intolerance, especially towards marginalized groups, women, LGBTQI+ groups, and persons, minorities, people whose only crime is being who they are. And let us be clear, women are not the problem. LGBTQI+ people are not the problem. Minorities are not the problem. The problem lies with those who spread fear and division. This trend is deeply dangerous for democracy, and it is why Iceland, as a member of the Human Rights Council, will continue to speak loudly and very clearly. Equality is not negotiable. Human dignity cannot be bartered away. Freedom of expression is the cornerstone of democracy. It is also the foundation of innovation, of culture, of progress. But freedom comes with responsibility. To distort free speech into the mass production of lies, propaganda, or AI-driven disinformation is not the exercise of freedom. It's betrayal. Twisting facts into fake news, science into lies, and upending reality is an attack on truth itself. Iceland will continue to defend freedom of expression, but also to insist that it be used responsibly, not as a weapon to harm or to divide. President, as global needs are at an all-time high, we are seeing large-scale reductions in development budgets by several major donors with profound consequences for the poorest countries and the most vulnerable. Iceland, we will not follow that path. Ultimately, development cooperation is an investment in our common rights and freedom, bringing us towards a more stable, just, and a peaceful world. The climate crisis that we are certainly facing knows no borders. In the high north, where Iceland lies, temperatures are rising more than twice the global average. Glaciers retreat, permafrost thaws, oceans warm. And it is the poorest, those least responsible, who suffer then the most. For us Icelanders, renewable energy is the backbone of our security and also of our independence. And the ocean is our lifeblood, our history, our livelihood, our identity. Its health is inseparable from the fight against climate change, and from the protection of biodiversity. The ocean gives, but it also takes. That shared understanding deepens our solidarity with small island states and others who are now on the front lines of sea level rise. Their reality must be faced by the entire UN membership together as a global family. Colleagues, the United Nations is not only about states and structures, it is about people, the people who work tirelessly for these organizations, often under immense pressure and even risking their own lives to uphold its ideals. To them, Iceland extends its deepest gratitude. Your dedication reminds us that the United Nations, imperfect as it is, we know that, still has a beating heart. But it is also about us here, the leaders gathered here. These are serious times that demand serious leaders as well. We cannot afford cynicism, short-termism, or the comfort of slogans. We must act with love for our people, with respect for our neighbors, and with wisdom for future generations. This is not naive. This is not naive. It is the essence of responsible leadership, and it is what the world needs from us. President, undermining the very institutions that have advanced peace, prosperity, and human rights over the past 80 years will only deepen the challenges we face. At this critical moment, it is crucial we reverse course so that we can pass on to the future generations that we may have at times taken for granted. The world needs the United Nations, and we have to be strong as we can be. And yes, we face daunting challenges, but our story as a global community is not only of crisis, not at all. It is also one of progress. Apartheid was abolished. Extreme poverty was cut in half. Treaties were created to protect our skies and to protect our seas. These achievements remind us of what is possible when we act together. For Iceland, the choice is very clear. We will always stand for equality, for respect for international law, and for peace, even when the tide turns against us, even when others wish these values silenced. We will not be silenced. We will keep these values alive, because they are the essence of the United Nations, and they are grounded in the dignity and worth of human person. And let us revive the ideals that inspired the founders in San Francisco 80 years ago, and draw on that same spirit today. Not for their sake, but for our children's sake. They deserve a world where peace, where justice, dignity, and freedom are not just words on paper, but lived realities. And that is the legacy we must leave them. Thank you so much.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Iceland. I now give the floor to His Excellency Subramaniam Jaishankar, Minister for External Affairs of India.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Namaskar from the people of Bharat. We are gathered here 8 decades since the founding of this unique body. The UN Charter calls on us not just to prevent war, but to build peace, not just to defend rights, but to uphold the dignity of every human being. It challenges us to stand as good neighbors, uniting our strength so that generations to come inherit a world of justice, of progress, and of lasting freedom. Madam President, forces unleashed by history since the founding of the UN propelled this body forward. As decolonization advanced, the world began to return to its natural diversity. The membership of the United Nations quadrupled, and the organization's role and remit grew significantly. In the era of globalization, its agenda evolved even further. Development goals took center stage, even as climate change emerged as a shared priority. Trade acquired greater prominence, while food and health access were recognized as essential to global well-being. Where security was concerned, the UN undertook peacekeeping operations and promoted disarmament discussions. As a result, the UN became a natural platform to debate key global issues. Madam President, we must ask ourselves today, how has the UN lived up to expectations? And just look at the state of the world. There are two significant conflicts underway, one in Ukraine and the other in the Middle East, West Asia. Innumerable other hotspots don't even make the news. The slow progress of the SDG Agenda 2030 presents a sorry picture. On climate change, the reality is of recirculated commitments and creative accounting. If climate action itself is questioned, what hope is there for climate justice? When a once-in-a-century pandemic hits us, we saw open discrimination in access to vaccines and to travel. Energy and food security have been the first casualties of conflict and disruption, especially since 2022. Better off societies insulated themselves by having the first call. The resource-stressed ones scrambled to survive, only to hear sanctimonious lectures thereafter. When it came to trade, non-market practices gamed rules and regimes. The resulting concentration exposed the world to leveraging. On top of that, we now see tariff volatility and uncertain market access. As a result, de-risking is a growing compulsion, whether from limited sources of supply or over-dependence on a particular market. Economic concerns have other dimensions as well. Heightened technology control is one. The grip on supply chains and critical minerals is another. The shaping of connectivity is no less sensitive. Protection of key sea lanes has become a challenge. Restricting the evolution of a global workplace is an issue. Each makes a compelling case for more international cooperation, not less. But are we really headed in that direction? And where has the UN actually made a difference? Madam President, as members of the UN, we meet here as sovereign equals. That is not a formalism, but a recognition of the inherent diversity of our world. Understandably, we have different history, traditions, heritage, and culture. For them to coexist, for them to enrich each other, it is imperative that we foster understanding and respect. This will only happen when we resist political interference and economic pressures, when narratives are free of prejudice, when double standards are abjured, and when pluralism is truly appreciated. Madam President, Excellencies, while asserting our rights, we must also firmly face up to threats. Countering terrorism is a particular priority because it synthesizes bigotry, violence, intolerance, and fear. India has confronted this challenge since independence, having a neighbor that is an epicenter of global terrorism. For decades now, major international terrorist attacks are traced back to that one country. UN's designated lists of terrorists are replete with its nationals. The most recent example of cross-border barbarism was the murder of innocent tourists in Pahalgam in April this year. India exercised its right to defend its people against terrorism and brought its organizers and perpetrators to justice. Because terrorism is a shared threat, Madam President, it is essential that there is much deeper international cooperation. When nations openly declare terrorism a state policy, when terror hubs operate on an industrial scale, when terrorists are publicly glorified, then such actions must be unequivocally condemned. The financing of terrorism must be choked, even as prominent terrorists are sanctioned. Relentless pressure must be applied on the entire terrorism ecosystem. Those who condone nations that sponsor terror will find that it comes back to bite them. Madam President, an objective report card will show that the UN is in a state of crisis. When peace is under threat from conflicts, when development is derailed by lack of resources, when human rights are violated by terrorism, the UN remains gridlocked. As its ability to forge common ground diminishes, belief in multilateralism also recedes. Central to the erosion of the UN's credibility has been resistance to reform. Most members strongly desire change, but the process is being made an obstacle to the outcome. It is imperative that we see through this cynicism and purposefully address the reform agenda. The historical injustice done to Africa should be redressed. Both permanent and non-permanent membership of the Council must be expanded. A reformed Council must be truly representative, and India stands ready to assume greater responsibilities. Madam President, today the predicament of the Global South is especially acute. Bharat, under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, believes that it has both a duty to contribute and an obligation to motivate. That is why we have undertaken more than 600 major development projects in 78 countries, as well as innumerable community-based initiatives. They range from large infrastructure to small livelihoods, from capacity building to people's welfare, from concrete assets to education and training. Turbulent times require that we step forward during moments of crisis. India has been forthcoming in that regard, especially in its immediate vicinity. whether it is finance, food, fertilizer, or fuel. We have responded to the urgent requirements of our neighbors. Madam President, climate events and conflicts have created a demand for HADR assistance. Reflecting our growing capabilities, Bharat has endeavored to be a first responder. Be it essential medicines or relief supplies, the operations of a field hospital or limb fitment camps, these efforts covered 19 nations last year. The people of Afghanistan and those of Myanmar saw India extend its hand during recent earthquakes. Our efforts at ensuring safe commerce, combating piracy, and preventing attacks on shipping in the Northern Arabian Sea also bear mention. And the Indian tradition of UN peacekeeping operations continues in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Western Sahara, Central African Republic, Golan Heights, Cyprus, Lebanon, Abyei, South Sudan, and Somalia. To put it clearly, our soldiers ensure peacekeeping, our sailors protect maritime shipping, our security counters terrorism, our doctors and teachers facilitate human development the world over, our industry produces affordable products, our techies promote digitization, and our training facilities are open to the world. These remain the core of our foreign policy. Madam President, each one of us has the opportunity of contributing to peace and prosperity. In the case of conflicts, especially Ukraine and Gaza, even those not directly involved have felt its impact. Nations who can engage all sides must step up in the search for solutions. India calls for an end to hostilities and will support any initiative that will help restore peace. The last decade in Bharat has also seen transformative changes due to the vision of Prime Minister Modi. Our digital public infrastructure has redefined governance and enabled delivery of public services on an unprecedented scale. Our startup ecosystem, innovation culture, and microfinance are changing the face of society. Our rapidly growing infrastructure facilitates both ease of doing business and ease of living for citizens. India remains committed to sharing its experiences and tools with others on their journey of development. Artificial intelligence as a horizontal and cross-cutting technology has a particular promise for development. India's approach is to harness it responsibly for human welfare. Inclusion and impact will be the watchwords for the summit that India will host in 2026. Madam President, Bharat approaches the contemporary world guided by three key concepts. One, Atmanirbharta, or self-reliance. That means developing our own capabilities, building our own strengths, and nurturing our own talent. We see its results already, be it in manufacturing, in space programs, in pharma production, or in digital applications. Make, innovate, and design in India also benefit the world. Two, Atma Raksha, or securing oneself. We remain determined to protect our people and secure their interests at home and abroad. That means zero tolerance for terrorism, robust defense of our borders, forging partnerships beyond, and assisting our community abroad. And three, Atma Vishwas, or self-confidence. As the most populous nation, as a civilizational state, as a rapidly growing major economy, we are confident about who we are and what we will be. Bharat will always maintain its freedom of choice and will always be a voice of the Global South. Madam President, these are certainly challenging times for the international community. Many of our assumptions and expectations no longer hold. In such circumstances, it is imperative to stay strong, to hold firm, and to deepen friendships. International cooperation must prevail because islands of prosperity cannot flourish in an ocean of turbulence. A world order requires common purpose, as it does empathy for others. That is where we look to the United Nations. Madam President, every member who can make this world a better place must have the opportunity to do their utmost. And for that to happen, reformed multilateralism is the obvious way. The 9th decade of the UN must be one of leadership and hope. Bharat will do its fair share and more. I thank you.
I thank the Minister for External Affairs of India. والآن أعطي الكلمة.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Badr Ahmad Mohammed Abdel Ati, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Egyptian Expatriates of Egypt. In the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate. Your Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly. Your Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations. Our celebration today of the 80th anniversary of the United Nations was supposed to be an occasion, an opportunity to reflect on the journey of this organization, an opportunity to think of the achievements of the organization in maintaining international peace and security and ensuring prosperity and development for all, and establishing an international order based on international law that are applied by all, that apply to all, to preserve the dignity and rights of all. However, the reality of this international organization today, 80 years after its establishment, has nothing to do with these noble goals. The multilateral international system is facing challenges. Its pillars are being eroded, it's fluid, as a result of crimes being committed in full view of the international community. The international community is standing idly by, is a spectator before the systemic violations of international law that undermined the international system. We're seeing double standards across the board, but especially in the Middle East. The Middle East is at a point of implosion. The bases of stability, peace and security are absent. There is no noteworthy respect of international legitimacy. Our Palestinian brethren is falling victim to the most heinous Israeli actions. It's a war, a wanton, unjust war waged against defenseless civilians for a sin they did not commit, driven by an extremist ideology that only sees destruction, killing, and systematic starvation, a toxic narrative, an incitement to hatred and violence. The aggression is transpiring without accountability. and it has affected one country of the region after the other. The most latest, what we've seen, is the wanton aggression against brotherly Qatar. Egypt is one of the first to anchor the pillar of peace in the region when President Sadat visited Jerusalem in a historic visit in 1979. Egypt feels concerned and feels responsible at the same time. 2 years following this wanton aggression against Gaza, following the daily violations in the West Bank, the foundations of peace that we have been laying for 75 years are now being threatened. In light of these difficult circumstances, Egypt presents its vision to deal with the situation in the Middle East and the international system as follows. First, we express our appreciation and gratitude to President Donald Trump, which announced his full commitment and his willingness to work with the leaders of the region to end this unjust war against Gaza, according to an integrated, comprehensive vision that stops the bloodshed, that ensures security for all, that restores the foundation to bring back lost trust. Egypt is fully willing and is fully committed to building on the vision by President Trump to restore stability, to end the war, to open a political horizon that paves the way towards the establishment of the Palestinian state, to also release hostages and detainees, and to heal all wounds, the wounds of the orphans, the wounds of the injured, the wounds of the hungry in the Gaza Strip, and put an end to the arrogance of might and to put it aside and to restore hope for tomorrow. Egypt, since the outbreak of this crisis, have done its utmost to reach a ceasefire that is sustainable in Gaza in partnership with brotherly Qatar and the United States of America. We worked on resuming the entry of humanitarian aid without obstacles to address the starvation that is made by Israel, created by Israel. We must restore the basic necessities of life. The entry of humanitarian aid must be a priority for the international community. Together, we all must ensure the provision of humanitarian aid as soon as possible and at scale. And we also must work together to protect civilians. We reiterate that we categorically reject any scenarios to forcibly displace the Palestinian people. This would be a crime of ethnic cleansing. We say this very clearly. Egypt is not and will not be a gate to liquidate the Palestinian cause. We will continue to support the resilience of the defined Palestinian people that is holding on to its national territories. We will never, never be a partner in a new Nakba. Bringing humanitarian tragedies, even more humanitarian tragedies. Egypt also presented a plan for reconstruction and recovery that was accepted at the Arab, Islamic and international level. We commend the invaluable role of UNRWA, the indispensable role of UNRWA. It is providing valuable support to millions of Palestinian refugees. We also commend the role of the United Nations and its specialized agency. We call upon the countries of the world to provide the necessary and sustainable support to UNRWA. The continued of Israeli occupation, the genocide transpiring today in the Gaza Strip, depriving the Palestinian people of their legitimate rights, most notably the right to establish its independent state along the lines of the 4th of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. This hollows out any narrative of peace and security in the region. In this regard, we express our full support to the conference on the two-state solution led by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and France. We commend the courageous decisions by states that have recently announced that they do recognize the independent free state of Palestine. Israel cannot be secure when others are not secure. The region cannot see stability without an independent state of Palestine. International resolutions contain the parameters necessary to settle the conflicts of the region. What we need is insight, wisdom, political will, and understanding the lessons of the past. We need foresight. In this context, we warn of the continuation of oppressive policies and irresponsible Israeli practices to close the door on peaceful coexistence and regional cooperation. In light of these challenges, Egypt and Saudi Arabia presented a joint vision for security and cooperation in the region, adopted by the League of Arab States. This would be the foundation for a new vision of a region where all countries enjoy balanced security, comprehensive security. We extend the hand of peace. Don't fail children that look to a bright future, young people that wish to build and restore. Don't fail the elderly that want to live in dignity and peace. I quote President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Peace is Egypt's strategic choice to ensure a secure and stable future for the peoples of the region. End of quote. Second, Egypt looks at the conflicts in the region from a perspective of international law, from a perspective that gives precedence to the sovereignty of states and settling disputes by peaceful means and maintaining national states and national institutions. Also, counter-terrorism. These are all bases for stability. In this context, Egypt stresses the importance of supporting brotherly Sudan that is going through a delicate juncture in its history. All efforts must be made. We strongly support maintaining and preserving the institutions of the Sudanese state, including the Sudanese National Army. We're working in cooperation with the Sovereignty Council and international partners as part of the International Quartet to restore stability, peace and security in the Sudan, based on national Sudanese ownership to fulfill the aspirations of the brotherly Sudanese people. We also firmly support brotherly Libya and its national institutions. Presidential elections, parliamentary elections must be held simultaneously as soon as possible. It is important for all foreign forces and mercenaries and foreign fighters to leave Libya. If we are serious about peace and security in Libya, this would consolidate stability and security and would unite Libyan institutions and allow it to extend its authority over all Libyan territory. The Yemeni crisis must be settled based on international parameters. We must maintain the security of navigation routes along the Red Sea. It is the lifeline of international trade. Egypt is one of the most affected parties from this escalation. We lost more than $9 billion revenues of the Suez Canal as a result of disruptions in international trade going through the Red Sea. The stability security and territorial integrity of Somalia is part and parcel of the security of the region. We call for making concerted efforts and mobilizing the necessary funding in order to activate the AU mission in Somalia. Egypt intends to contribute to this force with a military and police component. I also must strongly condemn repeated Israeli violations of the sovereignty of Lebanon and Syria. We condemn continued violations of Lebanese and Syrian territories. It is of utmost importance to respect the territorial integrity of Syria and Lebanon. Against this background, in light of these complex regional challenges, Egypt is playing a prominent humanitarian role. We are hosting more than 10 million refugees and displaced persons on our territory. We are providing an environment that respects their dignity, that respects their rights, and that ensures that they receive basic services without discrimination. Despite increasing burdens that go beyond our capacity, and I don't think that there is any other country in the world that is hosting such a number of refugees, providing this kind of services and treating them as Egyptians. As I said, these burdens go beyond our capacity, especially in light of regional and international economic crises. Nevertheless, Egypt continues to fulfill its moral and humanitarian responsibility. We believe it is important to share responsibility. The principle of shared responsibilities is contained in the International Convention on Refugees. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is leading the way to settle disputes. Our region has seen targeting nuclear facilities that are subject to the AIEA safeguard agreement, which is inconsistent with international law. Fourth, we believe that cooperation according to international law is the pillar of mutual respect and the only way to ensure joint benefits. Experience has shown that unilateral measures deepen crises and increase gaps. Ethiopia saw that imposing a fait accompli and violating international law as part of its destabilizing policy in the Horn of Africa and the Eastern Nile Basin declared that the dam has been completed and what's happened just has happened. It is delusional, as it believes that Egypt will forget its rights when it comes to the Nile. There's those who pay lip service to international law, but we are ready to resort to justice, to resort to international arbitration. If intentions to actually abide by these mechanisms turn out to be true, if they turn to stalling, if they turn to threatening the fate of people in downstream countries, we will get back our rights and we will not be lax in that journey. International law allows us to protect our existential interests in the Nile Basin. Fifth, we believe that restoring the United Nations and international financial institution is no longer a matter of choice. It's a necessity to ensure a balanced representation in the decision-making bodies at international level. Egypt is committed to the Zelwini consensus and the CERT declaration to lift the historic injustice that has inflicted the African continent. We also believe it's important to provide concessional financing and address the debt crisis. In conclusion, once again, I stress that we look forward to building upon the outcomes of the 4 Financing for Development conference hosted by Spain in July to take effective steps to finance development. We also look forward to enhancing efforts for developing countries to have access to AI and digital technologies. At COP20, at the COP conference hosted by Egypt, we made efforts to ensure we have a loss and damage fund, especially in light of crisis in climate financing. It's important to provide financing to developing countries without increasing the debt burdens on these countries. Ladies and gentlemen, the international landscape is critical and precarious at the moment. In light of our role, regionally, internationally, and in light of our historic role, we had to warn of the upcoming danger and present a roadmap to address this critical phase. We are at a critical juncture. Either the Middle East would go back to reason, to go back to international law, or we rush towards a state of chaos that some might think would be able to control by force, by the arrogance of force. However, experience and history has shown that using force would inevitably lead to a disaster. And the first to be affected by that are those who have used force. I stress that Egypt, as a founding member of the United Nations, remains after 80 years of the existence of this United Nations, we remain committed to international law. We remain committed to enhancing multilateral action, as we recognize that absence of international governance will affect us all. We have a negative impact on us all. There is no alternative to committing to international law and to enhance the implementation of international law. There is no alternative to holding violators of international law accountable. There is no country above the law. There is no country, whatever it is, that cannot be held to account. All this to maintain international peace and security, to achieve sustainable development, and to promote human rights. In conclusion, I quote President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi: peace is not born out of force and bombardment. It's not born out of normalization that peoples reject. Peace is only built on understanding, equity, and justice. I thank you very much. I thank His Excellency, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Egyptian Expatriates of Egypt.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Maxim Izhenokov, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Belarus.
Distinguished Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this year's general debate is Better Together, 80 Years and More for Peace, Development and Human Rights. An excellent theme. The key word here is together. So together, let's remember everything and reflect. And I'm confident that we will find the true root causes of the challenges and threats facing the planet today. First, the 80th anniversary of the great victory in the Second World War. 8 decades ago, a bloody and merciless war ended, which was a great tragedy for all of humanity. And only at the cost of millions of lost and broken lives did we overcome this challenge. The contribution of the United States and Great Britain to great victory is obvious, as is that of the Chinese people who threw off the yoke of Japanese militarism. However, the decisive factor was the feat of the Soviet people, a multinational people who fought down to the last drop of blood for their freedom and the freedom of oppressed peoples. Note that they did not hand over the keys to their cities to the conquerors. They did not hide behind pro-Nazi collaborationist regimes. They did not supply the Nazi regime with equipment and soldiers. Back then, 80 years ago, this was obvious. The liberators were greeted with flowers and rejoicing in the capitals of Europe. Monuments and memorials were erected in their honor, and streets and cities were named after them. Only 80 years of life have gone by since then, a life of prosperity and peace in Europe, and how everything has changed. The West has developed its own version of the truth about the events of those years. Memories are being erased, monuments demolished, history textbooks rewritten. Once again, we hear Nazi slogans and chants in city streets. This is how the 21st century generation is being raised, a generation that did not see the horrors of that war. They did not even hear about it from their parents. And so they are fueled by the false heroism of their ancestors who in the past had joined Hitler's coalition of nations, dreaming of world domination. If history is being rewritten, then its conclusions are also being rewritten. This calls into question the legitimacy of the post-war world order based on the universal principles of the United Nations. That seems clear. And it seems that they were forced into doing so. The West was forced into doing so for a certain period of time. The collective West was at that time forced to share the burden of responsibility for the fate of the planet with the so-called Soviet bloc, to set aside their thoughts of world domination for a while and to wait, of course, to wait for events to come to pass that would allow everything to be turned on its head. From this rostrum, in the past few days, we have already heard people say that the Holocaust is our shared shame. Why is it our shared shame? Everyone is answerable themselves before history. We, Belarusians, for example, fought Nazism down to the last drop of blood and laid down our lives to do so. We saved Jews at the cost of our own lives. We cannot remain silent about this today. We remember the hundreds of villages burned by the Nazis together with their inhabitants, the millions of Belarusians torn apart and mutilated, and the hundreds of thousands of children and women taken into European slavery. And therefore we understand that preserving memory is important so that history does not repeat itself, so that there are no more national ideologies of racial superiority, where there is no place for entire peoples, so that there are no concentration camps, that terrible invention of the West, and also to make sure that there is no genocide against any people. The Belarusian people have been living in peace now for 80 years, and if you look at our history, that is an incredibly long time to live in peace. Never have Belarusians lived so well, with such dignity and under such peaceful skies as in the last 30 years, when, under the leadership of our president, we have been successfully building a socially oriented state in the interests of ordinary people. At the same time, we sacredly preserve the memory of the terrible tragedy of the Second World War, and we pass this memory on to younger generations. Why don't many others around us, especially to the west of our border, want to live like this? Well, the answer is simple. The politicians there are blinded by their personal ambitions. They cannot see ordinary people behind those ambitions, even in their own countries. And so it is no surprise that they treat human life with such contempt, as well as that of other peoples, for example, calling on Ukraine to fight down to the last Ukrainian. This year is also significant for the UN, which is celebrating its 80th anniversary. The organization was created by the victors of that bloody war. We remember that Belarus was among the first founders as well. Belarus, a country where 1 in 3 people were killed, tortured or burned. And throughout all these years, the Belarusian delegation has been one of the most reliable supporters of strengthening the foundations of the UN, initiating the most bold, peace-loving and historically hard-won initiatives. Therefore, we have the right to speak directly today about what our organization has achieved by the time of its anniversary. And I would like to talk about 3 key elements. First, it is indisputable that the UN remains a central element of international life. This has been made possible by its undisputable legitimacy, its universal membership, and its comprehensive agenda. However, we can see that the principle of universality has been seriously undermined, especially in the last decade. And that has been done by those that are constantly trying to turn the UN into a tool for advancing their own interests, in addition to doing so contrary to the aspirations of humanity. Secondly, the UN is indeed preserving the planet from another world war. Its key mechanism, the Security Council, allows the great powers to discuss matters of war and peace at the table rather than on the battlefield. However, unfortunately, this body is being used less and less. Its influence on world affairs is no longer what it used to be, and let's be honest, the UN has proved incapable of preventing many of the bloody regional conflicts of our time, and the further thing goes on, the more this is true. Thirdly, a huge network of international structures has been created under the UN, and a multitude of legal documents have been developed. This infrastructure provides an opportunity for effective interaction across the entire spectrum of human activity. But if you look closely, only some of the UN structures remain truly effective and are actually fulfilling their functions. Why is this happening? Well, it's obvious. The organization has to keep up with the times. That requires reform, which our Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has been talking about, and first and foremost, that of the UN Security Council. And here I'm talking inter alia about expanding the category of permanent members to include developing countries from Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Over the past 8 decades, the membership of the organization has grown exponentially, and many states that were not even on the world map when the UN was founded want their opinions and voices to be heard, and they have a right to do so, as now they are important political and economic actors. They rightly expect the UN will work in the interests of all of its members and to strengthen cooperation between them, rather than being a tool for manipulation by individual countries. And this includes settling scores with other states. Fourth, we also see a problem in the fact that the UN is being used for certain purposes.